Hey everybody who's watching, today is a very special day. We've got one of our favorite brewers, one of these breweries that when we originally thought of the idea for Craft Commander, sat down and created a very short list and then a long list. And on that very short list was none other than Jester King, brewing out in just outside of Austin, Texas.
Yep,
Uh,
right out on the outskirts of town.
so we're here with Jeff, and Jeff's in his barrel room, very jealous. I'm in a empty room. So, so thanks for being a part of the of Craft Commander now for the second time, Jeff. Really
Oh,
appreciate
yeah.
it.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I don't know if a lot of people know this, but me and you have a somewhat of a special bond in your past life and my current life. We were just talking about it. Insurance law. how how did you end up getting into brewing?
Just homebrewing. I was actually, speaking of our common prior profession, or at least my prior profession of being a lawyer, a buddy of mine in law school gave me a homebrewing kit, and then just kind of from there it took off. Like the hobby turned into a passion, and ultimately I kind of developed the desire to open a brewery, which was about a 3-year process from idea to actually selling our first beer. Along the way, my brother moved down. My brother Michael moved down from Chicago to help me, and then another man who's our third partner in the brewery, named Ron Extract. He came in from. He was actually the only person who had some background in the beer world. He came to us from Shelton Brothers Importers, which, in my opinion, is the best importer in the U.S. Just bringing in some just amazing beers from overseas. As well as domestically, they move around some cool brands, including Jolly Pumpkin, which is probably our biggest inspiration. But anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent. But yeah, that's how we got started.
So when you started homebrewing, I think I read somewhere in like 2003.
Oh yeah, right around there, like right around the time I was in school, and started just focusing on like English and American ales, and eventually started to get into a little bit more Franco-Belgian driven beers, and then getting kind of teamed up with Ron. He started putting in front of me just some amazing beers from places like Thierry and Fantôme and Cantillon, and those beers just kind of really started to shape our vision of stylistically what we wanted to do here in Central Texas.
That's I feel like a lot of brewers doing that now, but it was kind of when you were doing that, especially in Texas, which everything I've seen and read in Texas is it was pretty much a general, amber, maybe a red. It was a pretty gutsy move to go into the realm of wild ales, Belgian inspired ales. Um, was there some sort of like major inspiration behind that? I mean, because it takes some guts to go off and do something that the area is not necessarily used to.
Yeah, we were a little nervous about it starting out. In fact, I mean, a lot of actual professional brewers here in the area told us like you will fail if you do not have not even an IPA. I mean, at the time they're like you can't. That's way too extreme. Is like having a flagship IPA. Like you have to have like a blonde ale or an amber ale or a pale ale, and if you don't have that, you're going to go out of business fast. And we heard that from a number of people, which we didn't totally buy into. And then on the other hand, there was already some amazing breweries here in Central Texas doing some really great kind of Anglo-American and German and Czech styles, like Real Ale is down the road from us that does some really phenomenal. They do a bunch of different beers, but I really dig their Anglo-American inspired ones. And then right here in East Austin is Live Oak, who, in my opinion, makes the best German Hefeweizen and Czech style pills in the United States. And so seeing those English and American and German styles done exceptionally well in our backyard, and really seeing an opportunity to do something different, and we wanted to add something new and unique to our home market. And then also, we just kind of randomly stumbled into our location, which is this 200-acre ranch on the outskirts of Austin, and being out here in the Texas Hill Country really kind of shaped our brewing style as well. We're on a working farm, and there's some interesting flora and vegetation around us that we thought might be interesting in terms of yeast capture and fermentation. So that was another inspiration.
Yeah, we're gonna get deep into that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that really interests me about Jester King is that kind of one of the themes throughout my throughout the interviews here with a lot of a lot of the brewers that we've talked to is, beer's place in the beverage world, kind of in comparison to, wine, maybe some high-end spirits, and wine especially because of terroir of wine, the sense of place, and that's something that I know you guys pride yourself on. So I really want to talk to you about that. I know the yeast is a big part of that. I know you guys, the water is a well water, right? I mean, you've got everything coming in from for the most part, you can from the local area, which is really cool.
Yeah.
When did you eventually, so you started home brewing on a kit, and I think it's 2009, I believe. You kind of really set your mind to this is what we're going to do, right?
That's right, yeah, right around there. And kind of went through a very kind of tried and true traditional method of getting a business off the ground. Wrote a business plan, for any kind of aspiring, whether brewery owners or just people who are looking to start a business. I mean, we just looked up some basic websites like Inc.com, Score.com, and just went through the very basics of like traditional business plan writing. Ultimately started with family and friends, and then went to, we never even attempted to go after like more kind of institutional money like venture capital or anything like that. Just kind of stayed very kind of grassroots, family, friends, working kind of just kind of like the 6 degrees of separation, like calling people, who do you know, who do you know, who do you know, and then through there we were able to raise right around $500,000, which for a production brewery is, in my opinion, about the kind of bare minimum that you can, well, I mean, you could do nano brewing for much cheaper, but like a full-fledged production brewery where we have a 30-barrel brew house and about, around 7,000 square feet of space, like for that kind of an operation, we raised, like I said, about $500,000, and then from there started the process and pretty much put a lot of sweat equity into our building. We dug the kind of ground for the foundation to go in ourselves, and then we found this old machine shop that was actually in southern Texas, and then we took it apart. We actually found it on Craigslist of all places and bought our building for like $3,000. Took a flatbed truck down to Texas, took it apart, shipped it to Austin, and then took about 6 months to rebuild the building right here in place. My brother Michael did a lot of that stuff. He's much better with engineering and building than I am. I was just kind of his grunt labor. And yeah, and then so from basically idea, like I think I mentioned this, but from idea to opening was about a 3-year process.
Right.
And then yeah, from there we were draft only initially, and yeah, I mean, not to get ahead of myself, but we've had a lot of favorable law changes here in Texas, which we can talk about here, that really helped us out.
Yeah. Well, we went through kind of the first phase, I think, of legislative issues that the craft brewing world in Florida had to deal with. The craft brewers in Florida had to deal with, what went from a bill that was originally, hey, we want 64-ounce growlers. All of a sudden, we had Big Beer having some people amend the bill to attack tasting rooms or tap rooms, and kind of make some very favorable to them interpretations of distribution law, which would have killed the craft beer growth in Florida, which right now is booming.
I just could not believe what was going on in Florida not long ago, especially the part where breweries would have to buy beer back from their distributor. I mean, my take on that was just legalized theft, basically. That was appalling. Frankly, I'm nervous about Texas distributors trying to pull something off similarly when our legislature meets again in 2015. But yeah, that was just criminal, on the verge of being criminal. Yeah.
It's incredible, and I watched a lot of the Senate hearings and things like that, and it was just, you have some rogue senators that are pushing this thing, and then you have a lot of senators who have no clue how the industry works, asking questions, and the answers were completely false. But because they don't know any better, are like, oh, okay, all right, it was really kind of scary to watch. But we'll get into your issues. 'Cause I think that you are, a great example of how change can be effectuated in outdated and completely biased laws. So I do definitely want to talk to you about that. But something you mentioned in your answer was you created a business plan. I don't know where I read this, but you had like apparently a very well thought out, planned, written business plan. Given the state of where people's mentality was in beer in Texas, do you think that all that prior planning, that business plans would help you come out and survive and thrive now? I mean, and the reason I ask that is because in a time right now where we're at with craft beer, which is great, there's a lot of innovation coming out, there's a lot of home brewers kind of trying to make their way into a professional brewing lifestyle. My fear is a lot of them won't do the planning that you did, and you can brew a great beer, but won't survive because of that aspect of it. Is that something that maybe you think could be something that negatively affects the growth of craft beer potentially?
Well, I mean, kind of big picture, I think, obviously, if you kind of look at like the chart of growth in craft beer right now, it's basically a vertical line. I mean, the growth is astronomical. Where I think we're about 33 to 3,500 breweries, and the number of breweries in planning, I think, even exceeds the number of current breweries that exist, or at least relative to the existing breweries. It's a very, very high number of breweries in planning, and I mean, ultimately, I think there'll be perhaps maybe some sort of perhaps leveling out of that growth pattern. I don't think the bottom's going to fall out. I think the American beer drinkers are becoming just more knowledgeable about beer by the day. So I don't see like a collapse. But and then also I think I think what may happen is that it'll be more difficult for startups to kind of take that next step into kind of like regional craft brewing status. Like here in Texas, we have Real Ale, which I mentioned, and St. Arnold and Houston, which are regional craft breweries doing about 60,000 barrels a year. And I think, and then there's some breweries that are kind of just now entering that stratosphere, like Karbach and Deep Ellum, and I think those kind of success stories are going to be a little more few and far between in the future. But I think the whole concept of kind of like the neighborhood brewery or the nano brewery or just a little more city focused is going to continue to really thrive for a while. I mean, I look at the number of wineries being about 7,000 in the United States, and then also I look at so many breweries that are kind of tied to the restaurant model, i.e. brew pubs, and I think there's still a lot of growth there. So I'm pretty bullish on craft beer continuing to still do really well. I mean, you kind of referenced like us and our planning. I mean, our plan was if our beer wasn't going to sell in Texas, we'd sell it out of state. I mean, like I mentioned, my partner Ron came from the sales and distribution world, so he had a plan for us where if we were so long as we were making really good beer, which we were confident we were going to, because we weren't just simply going to release any beer that we thought sucked. We were going to send it down the drain, or it was going to be good. Those were the two options for us. So we knew our beer would be there, and we knew if just the local market or even the statewide market would not support us, then we'd send our beer to places that would. And fortunately, pretty much from the very start, Texas was very receptive to what we were going to do.
Sure. Well, I think maybe my question, and that was probably answer a lot more of my future questions, but I think that maybe my question was geared more towards now looking back, how important was it for you as a startup brewery to have made sure that all your ducks were in a row prior to opening? Because it's not just brewing a good beer, it's a business too, right? I mean, yes, the first thing is let's put a good product out. But the second thing is you got to be profitable to stay alive. And
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a few things in place. I kind of mentioned the sales and distribution angle. We had the benefit of being able to self-distribute right from the start. Back years ago, the Shiner Brewery, or I should say the Spotzel Brewery that makes Shiner Bock, they were able to get a law passed to allow breweries to self-distribute. And so that was a big advantage early on. But, I mean, as far as our business plan itself, it didn't actually I mean, it forced us to kind of go through the process of really trying to know beer, know the beer industry. But as far as a plan to run a business, it didn't actually prove that valuable. From there, it was just kind of day in and day out grinding at it, and just, I mean, people ask, like, what's it like to run a business or open a brewery? And I always say, like, it's exciting from the standpoint that it's not a job. It doesn't feel like a job. I used to hate getting up in the morning and just wanted to stay in bed. But now I'm excited to go into work. Downside is there essentially is no time off. I mean, I'm always on. I'm always here at the brewery, or if I'm home, I've got the brewery in the back of my head. There's just like no leaving it. It's just like a different lifestyle. So I would say if you're like willing to commit like that to it, then it's almost impossible to kind of fully plan and know exactly what it's going to be like during that process. It's just being able to just adapt and just keep grinding day in and day out. Because, like, I mean, the stuff that I do now to help run our business, I had no idea about it all when I started. So I mean, yeah, do your homework, but otherwise, just be ready to just keep working and working and working. That'd be my best piece of advice.
Yeah, I'm friends with a lot of the brewers down here, and they're just like, there's nothing but brew clean, 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 brew clean, 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 clean. It's just a nonstop cycle. When did the name Jester King come about? How early on did that come about? And then, I kind of know the reason why you picked that name, but I think it's interesting. So, what does the name mean?
Well, sure. I guess the credit goes to a friend of mine named Brian Cullen, who actually came up with the name Jester King. But it was one of my homebrew buddies, and yeah, he. Well, originally the name was kind of inspiration from Shakespeare's King Lear, of the Jester King, of kind of the wise fool who was able to kind of exist outside of the hierarchy and kind of challenge authority through kind of mocking and satire. And initially, the name was kind of a rallying cry or a metaphor to us to kind of do what little we could to kind of attack, mainstream beer, basically, mass-produced light lager. But as we evolved as a brewery, it really became more of a metaphor or rallying cry for us to do a very kind of unique style of making beer that really is a departure from really what much of the craft brewing world is today, where we love and support craft beer, but in many ways we feel like what we do is somewhat apart from that. And so the name, again, is kind of a way to kind of challenge authority and exist outside of mainstream norms.
I notice a lot of your names have these kind of very abstract meanings. They kind of play off of other things. It's cool to see it, and the labels are obviously really beautiful. Right now, we're going to talk about this a little bit. I'm drinking the Atrial Rubicite, but you've got others like Witchmaker that I want to talk about too. I think it's really cool that you come up with these names. I mean, is that something that you guys try? Is it part of the storytelling of the brewery to kind of come up with these names and put some sort of sense to the beer, or is it? Do you come up with the name? I guess what I'm trying to get at is, do you come up with the name first, and then a beer that kind of plays into that name? Or you come up with a beer and you say, "Wow, this beer is this, this, this," and you think about it and come up with the name after you've produced the beer.
Yeah, so the creativity behind the naming of our beers is done by our in-house artist. His name is Josh Cockrell. Back when I left the legal world, I still needed to make a little money just to get by, so I started working at Austin Homebrew here in town. And when I was working there at the store, one of my customers was Josh, and we got to know each other pretty well and become good friends. And when he learned about my plans to open Jester King, he approached me about doing our art. And I was just really impressed with his vision and creativity. And so now, to answer your question, I mean, when we come up with a new beer, we tell Josh what the inspiration for the beer is, what the ingredients are, how it was made, and then just let him go from there. And so almost all of the names, with the exception of just a few, are Josh's creations, and then all of the artwork is his creation as well. So yeah, I mean, he adds a total another dimension to what we do, which I think just kind of really completes the picture, where we try to put some very interesting stuff down in terms of the liquid, but then he just kind of adds a whole other dimension to it with his creativity, and he's pretty diverse in what he does. I mean, he's done everything from like a very kind of like elegant portrayal and like Fen Tao, which had like a social, pro-gay rights message, to just kind of like total like bizarro kind of almost like grotesque like Levian Rose, to a little more occult like Witchmaker, to just totally like comical like we make this beer called Ombre, which is just like this goofball label that's poking fun at American Gothic. I mean, it's just he's kind of all over the map, but I mean, I think that's a positive thing. He's got a good range.
Right. I'm looking at Fen Tao right now. I didn't know the meaning behind Fen Tao. I mean, and can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. The name is Fen Tao is basically literally it means it's like a Chinese byword for homosexuality. Fen Tao it means another meaning for it is let me take one step back. So when Josh was coming up with the inspiration for the beer, he was reading some Chinese folklore, and he came up with the story of this the shared peach. And so it was kind of just this story, a very simple story of like one lover giving a peach to his same-sex partner, and just to appreciate the beauty of this peach. And then from there, he weaved in a couple other Chinese folklore stories of like carp swimming upstream towards a dragon's gate, and another one where another same-sex story where one lover cuts off his sleeve so as not to disturb like his sleeping partner, and basically he combined all of those folklores in this image. And then the name, Fen Tao, the shared peach, was the name, and basically just he did it to just celebrate the common struggle towards like equal rights, and it was just, I thought, really just like it's a beautiful story and a beautiful portrayal, which as I mentioned, he'll do totally weird things in a bunch of different veins, but like this was a little more kind of like very subtle and classic, and I really dug it.
Yeah, I mean the label's beautiful, like you were saying. You got the peach and you got the carp. I had no clue any of that.
Yeah, the little river is the cut sleeve, and the carp are swimming up the.
Look at, yeah, you're right. No, obviously you're right, but See, I think that's really cool. It adds to kind of the artisan feel of what you're doing. And what I noticed is a lot of craft breweries are getting into a lot of different social issues, charitable issues, through what they are producing, and it's it's a shame that the legislatures around the country are holding these very positive companies and very positive messages down because of a little bit of that, a lot of that. So I know originally you guys were, I guess we're going back in time again. We're going to be going back and forth, I guess.
Okay. Cool.
You originally, you guys had to focus on sessionable beers, and part two of that is I know that you originally wanted to can a lot of your beers.
Yeah, that's funny. To take that first part, or the second part first, that was one of the lessons we learned. I mentioned like as much homework as I tried to do in writing a business plan, there just wasn't preparation for everything. We learned very quickly, when taking anywhere from 4 months up to a year to make beer, that we weren't going to be able to survive as a brewery if we put that beer into cans and sold it at 6-pack pricing, anywhere from like $8 to $12. It just was a failing business model. We realized that if we're going to spend that time to make the beer, and time is by far the most expensive ingredient in our beer, that we would have to make a much better margin off of that. And for whatever reason, beer that's put in large format bottles, in our case 750 milliliter bottles or 500 milliliter bottles, we make a better margin off of than if we were to put the beer in 12-ounce bottles or cans and sell it as 4-packs or 6-packs. So, that was just kind of one of the economic lessons we learned, that it was not going to be feasible to do canned beer. I mean, we love canned beer. I'm actually drinking a anti-hero from Revolution Brewing in Chicago. We sell cans in our tasting room, but again, I mean, just from a business perspective, if you're going to sell beer in cans, you best be making a lot of it and making it pretty fast, because otherwise you're just not going to be able to compete on a margin basis in the craft beer world.
Right. Well, that's why I guess an IPA or a pale ale that's not influenced by your house yeasts and Brett and all these other souring bacteria that take a while to evolve are not going to be very conducive to cans.
Yeah. You asked about session beer too, and I mean that was a friend of mine is Michael Tonsmeyer, the mad fermentationist, and actually as far as like learning how to make beer, I think his website is the best amateur beer making website out there. Again, it's called The Mad Fermentationist. He's based out of Washington, D.C. He just wrote this awesome book called American Sour Beer that was published by the Brewers Association. And Michael told me that he strongly believes that alcohol should not be in beer for alcohol's sake, that if there's alcohol, it should be for added complexity and overall just kind of harmony of the beer, and we really took that message to heart. My partner Ron, again, is a big kind of session English ale fan, like bitters and ESBs and milds, and so the combination of Michael's influence and Ron's influence really led us to make some very sessionable beers. Two of the first beers we made were a beer inspired by English mild called Commercial Suicide. We called it Commercial Suicide because it was low enough in strength where beer geeks weren't going to like it, and it was dark enough in color where mainstream beer drinkers were not going to like it. So it was a beer effectively with no market. And then we also made Petite Prince, which is our table beer. That was, I mentioned Thierry early. Thierry is this little brewery in Esquebec, France. They're just a classic farmhouse brewery, and they make a table beer that we just fell in love with. And so that was probably our main inspiration for making a table beer. Is like we couldn't get Thierry's, so we're like, we've got to make our own because this is what we want to drink. And right now we don't have a flagship beer. We basically brew over the course of the year about 25, 30 beers a year. We don't like our brewers to be like engaged in factory work. We want it to be new and interesting all the time. So with the one exception though is Petite Prince, which we do try to keep on our schedule pretty much. So it's going to be around all year, and that's mainly because we like to drink that beer more than any other beers we make because it's 3% alcohol, and we think it has a lot of nice hop and yeast character. So we that's kind of our take on session beer.
Yeah, and the market's kind of gearing towards session beers, but it's nice to have sessionable beers that are full of flavor. Sometimes they fall short of that in an effort to keep the alcohol content down. I feel like they fall short. So nice table beer. Let's talk really quick about Atrial because now we're on top of all your beers.
Cool.
What I've got is, what batch is this? Blend 4. So April of this year. Raspberries, sour, beautiful beer. The funk, the funk from the yeast. What would you say to describe this beer, and how did the idea for this beer come about?
Sure. I mentioned kind of inspirational breweries for us. One of them being Cantillon, just traditional lambic makers. We're very, very, very careful to make it clear that our beer is not lambic, it's not spontaneously fermented. We do have a spontaneous fermentation program that is about 2 years in the works that will begin our third coolship season on in just a few weeks here, which we're really excited about. But everything we've ever sold has been a beer that has been pitched with yeast and bacteria, our house culture. So, I don't want to take up all night answering the question, but I'll kind of break it down a little bit in terms of like what we want to do with a beer like Atrial Rubicite. It starts with just trying to make a really good base beer, because the fruit re-fermentation is going to be really the final part of the process. So we take well water, unfiltered, untreated, raw Texas well water from right below our brewery, and we do a very, very simple grist, just like Pilsner and wheat, pretty low gravity. We get 100% attenuation, apparent attenuation with our beers. Our beers finish at 0 Plato, extremely dry. Some of them even finish negative Plato. And so we wanted to make like a very dry, golden wild ale that has a lot of interesting yeast characteristics. And for our yeast character, our head brewer, his name is Garrett Crowell, created a very interesting mixed culture. One thing we really try to identify to people who visit our brewery and drink our beer is that our beer is not pure culture fermentation. And in fact, it's not even just blends of lab yeast. I mean, people can make a mixed culture beer that has, pure culture Brett from White Labs and pure culture Lacto from, Y yeast, and that's all well and good. It can make some really awesome beers, but we really want to make something that's like truly unique to our little piece of land here in the Hill Country. So our mixed culture was constituted just one time about 2 years ago, where we took just 2 strains of pure cultured brewer's yeast, the strain from Thierry, one of our favorite breweries in the world, and then DuPont, which we have a ton of respect for, and blended it with all kinds of native organisms. Organisms from our coolship inoculations, and then organisms from agarita berries that we just picked out in the fields where our brewery is located, made yeast starters out of the agarita berries to the wort, let it ferment out, harvested the dregs, blended them with the brewer's yeast strains, and then we keep that going. We call it our mother culture. It's been going now for about 2 years. All we do is feed it with wort every 2 or 3 weeks. We don't deal with a yeast lab here at Jester King. We don't have a yeast lab. We just have this mother culture, and actually our head of our barrel program, her name is Adrienne Ballou. She went to UC Davis. She's the only person at our brewery with actually a brewing science degree, and she sent some of our mixed culture back to UC Davis just recently, and they sent us a lab report on it, which I literally got in my email box like an hour before I got on the air with you, and it was just like a list of like everything they could identify in our mixed culture, and 90% of the names I didn't even recognize scientifically, and it was just like just this data set of all this just different organisms. And so we don't even, again, we don't have a brewer's lab or a yeast lab. We don't even know exactly what we're working with. We just know we're working with a lot of native organisms here that we've cultured from our brewery. And so I know I'm being a little long-winded here, but that's really what the base beer of Atrial Rubicite is, just a beer that really is focused on fermentation with native organisms to create something that's unique to our land. From there, I mentioned Cantillon at the beginning of my answer. The inspiration for the fruit re-fermentation comes from Cantillon. We're enormous fans of their brewery. We think they're probably the greatest brewery in the world. And from there, again, we're not making lambic, but we do take fruit, only real fruit. We're not using any like extracts or concentrates or anything. And in this case, the fruit, we try to use local fruit. In this case, we're using fruit from Oregon raspberries. And we do this technique called a punch down. We put the fruit into an upright barrel. That we pop the head off the barrel, fill the barrel full of fruit, rack the kind of base beer, the wild ale into all the spaces between the fruit, and we do this technique that Adrienne came up with called a punch down. She learned it during her kind of winemaking days, and you like mash down on the cap of the fruit with a stainless steel mashing tool. It
Right.
keeps the fruit from drying out and becoming oxidized, which can lead to acetic or acetobacter growth. On a side note, if you want to like get me going on my like biggest frustration or pet peeve in American like sour beer making today, it would be acetic beer that's just vinegary. I encounter it just too often, unfortunately, and I think that's probably like where the biggest room for growth in sour beer making in the United States exists today is less acetic beer.
Sure. I
Um,
think a lot of people would agree with you.
yeah. But I'll wrap this up. But like, so we do the punch downs of the fruit to extract the flavors and the aromas of the fruit to let the fruit re-ferment to dryness. It takes about 2 months, and then we bottle condition from there, and that's atrial rubicite.
That is a way better answer than I was expecting. So,
All right. I can get a little. Sorry, I know.
no. I'm saying I mean it. I mean it. I love that answer. I know a lot of the people that watch the interviews always tell me they love how the brewers go to, but no one's ever gone into, especially a beer like this. This is, and you can see like I'm not surprised when you see it. I mean, look at the color on it. I guess is so I can get a good angle on it, but man, you can see how pink it is. The head is pink. It's a beautiful beer. There's so much complexity to it, and you can so that's why I'm not surprised when there's a bunch of organisms living in this thing that you've never seen before because the complexity is coming from somewhere. So I know you guys are very proud of sense of place. I love that about your brewery for what it's worth. Have you ever done like a side by side with your beers not with your house yeast versus with your house yeast and seen exactly what that sense of place is?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually kind of easy to tell because I mean, we didn't. I mentioned that we constituted this mixed culture about 2 years in, and we're 4 years old. So I mean, this isn't the beer we were making from the very start. I mean, we were a pure culture fermentation brewery in part from day one. The early incarnations of Witchmaker and Commercial Suicide were pure culture fermentation with English ale yeast, and we try to be open about our past. I mean, for everything I said about not wanting to make a blonde ale and an IPA, and I think we very much achieved that from the start of doing something that was unique. Our beer did not have the sense of place that it does now from day one because we were using saison, pure culture saison yeast, pure culture English ale yeast. We were engaging in wild fermentation from the start. The first wort we ever made was for a strong wild ale called Boxer's Revenge. But kind of happening side by side with that were some pure culture, clean fermentations, and we kind of had that divide that a lot of breweries have today. Like I think one of the best breweries in the world, Russian River makes sparkling clean, super awesome Pliny the Elder, and then has some amazing beers like Temptation and Sanctification side by side. So we were right there too. I mean, we were making like a clean English mild, a clean rye IPA, and then eventually we started to get a little bored with that, and we started to think. I don't think we're going to go out of business if we really just kind of go for it in terms of making something that is original. I mean, we were tasting some of our beer and we're thinking like, this version of Witchmaker, tastes kind of like this rye IPA I had from a brewery in Nevada or California or wherever, and that kind of, that didn't sit well with us really, and we wanted to truly like make something that this is ours. We're this little piece of dirt in the hill country, like we're kind of this weird place to get to. Like let's make sure we're making something that like really has like our fingerprints on it, that is not going to be like everything else. And at that point, we started working on let's develop a house culture that just really derives from the hill country here in fermentation wise, and so that's kind of spawned that mixed culture that came into existence about 2 years ago.
Sure, and I love that too because that again kind of goes back to pushing what a lot of people don't see beer as an agricultural product, right? And so you're kind of pushing the envelope somewhat. You're being innovative by being very traditional to a certain degree. You're going back to those Belgian Franco styles, farmhouse styles, local products used in the beer as much as possible. Um, but you're also, just like in what people regard as agricultural beverage wine, you've got that sense of place, that one spot on the mountain that tastes different than the other side of the mountain because the water runs off it differently, or the sun hits it differently, or the wind affects the grapes differently. And in effect, you're creating a product which is not necessarily to that extent. You're not growing this, the hops or anything, but you're creating a product that has that terroir because it's got the microorganisms from the area. That's really that amazing. I think that breweries like yourself are really going to push the boundaries of craft beer, and you are pushing the boundaries of craft beer, but you're going to push it to the next level where you're going to have people, putting this on the same level as $200 bottle of wine at the table.
Hopefully, it's a good point. Hopefully, it won't cost that much because we still think beer should be an affordable luxury. But no, your point stands. I mean, we're a bit of a black sheep in the craft beer world, especially locally, because we kind of ruffle a little bit of feathers when we say stuff like this. But I mean, a lot of beers are a city water source with malt from Brewer Supply Group, with yeast from White Labs, and hops from Hop Union, where you can make the exact same beer pretty much anywhere in the world. One of our favorite quotes from a Belgian brewing scientist who lived in the early 20th century, Martin van Leer. I'm only going to paraphrase the quote, but it was just kind of describing, as breweries and brewing became more mechanized and industrial, pure culture fermentation became the norm. And the point of the quote was that something got lost along the way. Another example I can think of is there was a New York Times piece not long ago on a sense of place in the wine world, and it spoke to the things you mentioned, like the soil and the sunlight, but it took it a step farther, saying that like microbes were really the driving force of what are giving these wineries the kind of the land or house character, and that kind of really hit home with us, where we said, okay, let's use water that is not city water. Let's use grains that are grown locally. And when I say grown locally, we're trending in that direction. So, if you walk into our brewery right now, you'll see malt from Vireman and Great Western, malts that exist, in a lot of breweries and are available in a lot of places and are really good malts. But we're also working with Blacklands Malt in Leander, Texas, who are working with farmers in North Austin, places like Georgetown and Hutto, to grow barley and wheat. They're a year old. Their first two barley crops completely failed. But we're going to stick with them, and we're going to support them. And so we're going to have increasingly more locally grown barley and wheat. Hops, to your point, don't grow well in Texas. There's a varietal called Neo Mexicanus that kind of grows in the western Texas that we may be able to use, but I mean that's just kind of a pipe dream at this point. We do age some of our hops on site, but hops again don't come from Texas. So when it really came down to it, it's like, what can we do that is unique? And we thought, it's got to be in the fermentation. Like, that has to be the unique process of it. It can't be pure culture fermentation, or a beer is probably going to taste exactly like everyone else's, and that's not something we wanted, both from a business standpoint and from the standpoint of wanting to drink something that we really like.
Sure. Does kind of on the same vein, does your beer at the table with food come into consideration at all when you're coming up with recipe designs? And
kind of in reverse, like our I mentioned our head brewer Garrett. He derives a lot of his inspiration from his recipes, especially his grist and his use of adjunct ingredients from the food world. Like when I hang out with him, like he'll taste various foods, sometimes at beer dinners, and he'll kind of like you can see him at the table, kind of shaping a recipe around that. So he's a little bit more food driven. And then also we really had that talent to create our mixed culture fermentation. So the answer would be kind of yes, kind of like in reverse. we take dishes that inspire us to make beer, not so much making beers to pair with dishes.
Yeah, that's a that's a very fair answer. I think that there's a lot of, especially down here. I mean, we're seeing a lot more a huge spike in the amount of beer dinners going on, beer pairing dinners, and a lot of higher end restaurants are starting to get into the trend. And I think it's only elevating again the status of craft beer, and I think it's a good thing. A lot of people, I don't necessarily think that beer is ever a food product or a beverage to be at the table with food, which is kind of weird because I think in history people probably had food at the beer at the table before they had wine at the table. Beer and cheese is another example of a pairing that is probably more symbiotic than wine and cheese.
Yeah. There's a local brewer that we really dig what he's doing. Well, local in the sense that he's from San Antonio. His name's Scott Metzger. He's the owner of Freetail Brewing in San Antonio, which is one of our favorite Texas breweries. And he's publicly called out chefs on social media for having these awesome menus with incredible food, these beautiful wine lists, and just a total crap beer list. And I kind of like that kind of more aggressive tact that he's taken, and I think it's starting to really turn the curve, especially here in Austin. Like, you go into some good restaurants now, and you see some really nice beer lists. In our case, we're a little bit hurt by the fact that it's really hard to get some of the world's best beer into Texas. Our licensing fees are astronomical. To continue referencing Cantillon. If Cantillon wanted to sell their beer in Texas, they'd have to buy a $7,000 license, and there's no way in the world they're going to do that. They'll just sell their beer somewhere else because obviously they don't have enough beer to go around for everybody. Right. So that's something we face here, where our scene is getting better. There's some great beers being brewed locally or in the state of Texas, and then also coming into Texas, but we're a little hurt by the fact that small artisanal out-of-state breweries just can't make it into our state, but it's getting better.
Yeah, and you guys have been a part of that legislative change is making it better. I know you, I think with a couple other plaintiffs or people, let's personalize them, filed suit against Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission. I don't remember when, but a while back.
Yeah, it was, I think, starting to get hazy in my mind too. It was, I think the case was decided in 2012. I'd have to actually even check that at this point. But basically, it stemmed from this just kind of archaic law in the books where if a beer was under 5% alcohol, you could call it beer. But if it was over 5% alcohol, it could not be called beer. It had to be called either ale or malt liquor. Yeah, which was kind of silly. I mean, if a beer is 10% alcohol, it's still beer. And so we unfortunately we didn't want to, but we sued the state of Texas. We had some good co-plaintiffs in the case, and we were the kind of the brewery representative, and we won. The judge just totally agreed with us and said that what the state law is doing is just totally turning the definition of beer on its head. And probably the biggest fallout of that decision was that it made it easier for out-of-state breweries to get into Texas because they didn't have to print separate Texas-specific labels. Right. We were just out in California for the Shelton Brothers Festival, and we did a collaboration at the brewery in Orange County, and they're, I don't want to break the news. I don't think it's probably any secret, but they're going to be sending their beer to Texas soon, which we're really excited about. And they said that
heard it first.
Yeah, they said they never would have done it if they still had to put up with the Texas labeling laws. So that was one of the first barriers that was broken down, and the barrier we hope to break down next is the licensing fees that I spoke of that are just really high and totally discriminatory against small brewers.
There was, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was two aspects to the lawsuit. One was a First Amendment argument about the labeling of the beer, right? And then The second one was a 14th Amendment argument, and I think that was
Yeah.
the protection argument, meaning I guess it's the wine. Basically, wineries were able to sell wine directly on premises, and breweries were not able to sell their product on premises.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the part that I just mentioned that we won was a First Amendment challenge, just saying that freedom of commercial speech, saying that this is beer, we should be able to call it beer. Part of that was the state of Texas had also said that we can't tell the public where our beer is being sold, and fortunately, the judge threw that out too, saying that like as a small brewery, we should be able to say that hey, if you go to the Draft House in Austin, Texas tonight. A keg of our, Petite Prince is on draft there. That's not going to, destroy the three-tier system or offend public sensibilities or whatever the rationale was. That it's legal for us to say where our beer is sold. So on the First Amendment stuff, the judge completely agreed with us, and we won at a total victory. Where we lost was, as you mentioned, on the 14th Amendment stuff, and that was just us saying that okay, wineries are fermenting grapes, we're fermenting grains. What's the practical difference? Wineries can do anything they want. Breweries have a ton of restrictions. Let us be on the same footing as wineries, and that part we lost. The judge did not agree with us, but fortunately, about a year and a half, 2 years later, the legislature in Texas came through and made a sweeping change that allowed breweries, specifically brew pubs, to sell beer on site and distribute the beer out to the market, which has been like the biggest leap forward in Texas brewing history since like brew pubs were legalized back in like '94. So it was a huge leap forward for Texas beer that just happened.
That's amazing how backwards that is. Now, since you were on kind of the forefront of the change in Texas, I guess is there any advice you could give to other states, craft breweries, with regards to affecting legislative change? And through Craft Matter, I've been trying to push the idea of, to me, the most practical argument is you guys are employing local members of the community. You guys are collaborating with other local businesses and helping them succeed. It's a culture. It's not like it's not like the idea of beer is this like everyone just goes and gets drunk and fights, and it's like it's becoming a very cultural aspect to beer, which is nice. Kind of going in more like again European. You go to Europe and everybody's drinking beer all day long anywhere they want, and there's no issues.
Right.
And I've been trying to get as much as I can involved down here in Florida with getting the breweries exposure to elected officials, not for any reason other than just to inform them on the processes, inform them what the business is. Is there any advice that you would give, having been on the forefront in Texas, fighting these kind of antiquated and very probably strong-held laws, you could give to other states' craft brewing guilds with regards to changing laws in their favor?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could give more of like a fight the good fight, like Mr. Smith goes to Washington answer about like rallying public support, grassroots movement, making arguments about creating jobs, building the local economy. But we made those arguments for several legislative sessions in a row, and we got absolutely no traction, and felt like that was just meaningless rhetoric in the eyes of the legislature. It wasn't until distributors started to realize that, okay, craft beer is something that's not going to go away. We can't just beat it down and make it disappear. How can we make money off of it? And sadly, that kind of cynical view, I think, is very true. And eventually the distributors said, okay, all right, like I said, it's not going away. How can we deal with it? And they said, if we allow breweries that are very small, like Jester King, making under 10,000 barrels a year, we'll let them sell beer at their brewery, and they'll grow, and then they'll need us to get their beer to market. And that's where we stand now. it's made a huge difference for a very small brewery like us. We're under 10,000 barrels a year annual production. In fact, we're like at 1,500, so we're well below the cap. And we can do practically anything we want now. We can sell our beer by the glass. We can sell bottles to go. And it's great. It's totally changed our business. We've been able to hire far more people. We've been able to expand our barrel room, which I'm sitting in right now. And it's been really helpful.
Right.
But for big brewers, or bigger brewers like our friends at Real Ale, like they still can't sell beer to go. You go out to Real Ale, you sample their beer, you want to take a case home, you can't. And so that's kind of the downside. So it has been a big leap forward in Texas beer. You know, I said as much, and I believe that, but I'm still kind of cynical about it. Where like the distributor said, okay, we'll give you a little bit, which we think will actually help us, but no more, little guy. So.
Right.
I don't know. It's kind of an unfortunate scenario. I guess my piece of advice would be just like play to the economic interests of the distributors, which are frankly are like our corporate masters in the beer world. So, so.
It's so sad, man. It's like depressing. Listen to this.
Oh, really. I wish I had a better, a happier answer. But like.
Oh man, I want to go cry. Speaking of selling bottles in the brewery, let's get back to Jester King itself. But beers like Fen Tao and Atrial Rubicite they're sold, it's my understanding, only on the brewery, right? And I've seen lines, pictures of lines for these beers, and they sell it immediately. Is that something you ever envisioned for your beer?
No, not really. I mean, I was kind of shocked. I mean, once we were maybe a couple years in, we'd see photos of like other breweries. Like we're good friends with the people at Crooked Stave. In fact, Chad Jacobson at Crooked Stave was one of the first people we kind of struck up a dialogue with as far as beer making and sharing beer and really learning a lot from. I mean, the people I cite as like really inspirational for us domestically would be, Crooked Stave and Jolly Pumpkin. The same would apply to Ron Jeffries at Jolly Pumpkin. And yeah, those guys were hugely inspirational. But these last everything what Crooked Stave was doing, and as soon as we got the right to sell our beer on site, we thought, well, maybe we have a chance to do this too. These batches, I mean, yes, it's good beer. I mean, yes, we think it's really exceptional. Yes, we think it's unique. It's also very small volume. And like I said, I mean, we're making 1,500 barrels a year. Like the Fen Tao release, I think was like 2,000, 2,500 bottles. And it's going to go really quick, especially in a state where there's like 25 million people, like Texas. And so, I mean, we'll take partial credit that we think our beer is good, but it's not very high volume, so there's some kind of I don't want to take too much credit for like we're making this thing that like people do travel for, but we sell it out because there's not a ton of it too. So.
For under 21, you're not supposed to be watching this, but if you are, there's a lesson on humility right there in that answer.
No, I mean it's true.
That's awesome. I'm watching you like trying to figure out the most humble way to answer this question. Listen, you're making an exceptional product. You accept it, all right? I wish I was in Austin, and I know people that live in Austin, and I can't get them to trade me your beer to save my life. It's incredible. It's a testament to what you set a goal, you set an idea. You've been flexible. Obviously, through the conversation, we've really been flexible and kind of like what you thought was going to happen, and adapted to what you needed to do. But you guys are pushing the boundaries and being rewarded for that. I'll be the bragger for you. You're producing a product that is far superior to most of what else is out there. So I'll state it so you don't have to, all right? There we go. So, there's, I forgot where I was going with that, but What do you see as I guess, the biggest goal you have for the next, couple years with Jester King? You've kind of you've taken a product and you've made it your own. What's the next kind of, I guess, self goal, or maybe collectively between the owners? It doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, I want to produce,
Yeah.
another 10,000 barrels, but I guess your first goal is probably sense of place, and you've adapted to make sure that that happens. Is there any other goal kind of like that you foresee coming, that you see that you're working towards?
Yeah, I would say I'd throw two things out. I mean, one, in terms of making our beer, to continue to really do something that's exceptional and has a sense of place that you referenced, and then also kind of, one of the things we're like I mentioned, our spontaneous fermentation program. We're excited to see that get off the ground. We're about 2 years in, and we're kind of waiting patiently, and we could start to blend now, I believe, but we're going to let one more season go by. It's starting to finally get cold here in Texas, where we get some lows in the 30s, and we'll set up our cool ship. We're literally setting up our cool ship tomorrow, and we'll leave it in our brewery for about 3 months until the weather starts getting hot again. And so spontaneous fermentation is like a big kind of goal or future project that we've been working on already for a long time. From there, I would say, continue to do very interesting things with our beer making. Like, I'll mention our head brewer again, Garrett Crowell. I mean, he's just done some wonderful things for our beer through his own creativity. So continue to really kind of be there in terms of, like, hopefully putting out some of the beer that people enjoy the most in the world. I mean, that's obviously a very almost like arrogant thing to say, but I mean, that is our stated goal, is to like really make some of the best beer in the world. So that would be one point. The second point would be to have a really cool hill country destination location, which I think we've been able to achieve to some extent already. You come out to our brewery, and we're very rural. We're about almost 20 miles from downtown Austin, and if you come out here, it's just a bunch of pastures and live oak trees, and it feels very laid back. And we really try to foster that. Like, we don't allow any like party buses or anything like that. Like, we want this like chill place that you can just come out, bring your dog, bring your kids if you got them, and like hang out. And so continuing to like foster that, because Austin is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. In fact, like, I've seen like magazines that have had it like #1 on the fastest growing metropolitan areas, and the city's going to grow, and I mean the area around us will get more and more populated. So we really want to like, okay, let's take this little chunk of land here and just keep it totally undeveloped, and just keep it a place to kind of hang out and be kind of chilled and laid back.
And Austin being a kind of more progressive city also, I'm sure, helped the success of your brewery early on. I mean, people who are more willing to accept new ideas of food, beer. I mean, it's a more of a art community. And,
Yeah.
And I see. I mean, I've had a few examples of your beer, and another idea going through craft beer is that beer is art. And I think that again, I'm not trying to suck up, but it's true. Your brewery, not only with the actual product you're putting out, but the whole thing around it, the labels and the stories behind the names, and the story behind the name of your actual brewery itself, all lends to this idea that beer is art. And so I think Austin is a great place for a brewery like yours to start up, where that's something that people are very susceptible to, very welcoming of.
Yeah, definitely. We're in a cool town, and so it's been, I guess, one of the most like flattering things that like we've gotten is I feel like we're part of like the local fabric now. I mean, like, what kind of to some degree like kind of puts me in awe is like, I moved to Austin in 2007 mainly to follow my wife to Texas, who was originally from Lubbock, and then then Austin. And there's a lot of quote carpetbaggers here in Austin. I mean, most people in Austin are like from somewhere else, and including myself. And like to have moved here in 2007, and like now have
You're a Florida guy, man.
Yeah, I grew up in Bradenton, Florida, just south of Tampa, and yeah, I'll actually be going back there next month to visit my grandparents. They're still in Sarasota. But anyway, like to have come to Austin fairly recently and like have had a big part in creating something that's like people reference of like things to do and culturally and food and beverage wise when coming to Austin. Jester King, people mention that as a place to go and check out for people checking out our city, and that's immensely flattering. So like that's probably the biggest sense of enjoyment I get from it is just like be part of the Austin like cultural landscape.
That's awesome. Well, look, it's getting long now. I could talk to you for hours, but I want to say thank you again. I really do. I want to thank you for being part of the website again. I
Yeah, it's a
appreciate it.
lot of fun, Marco. Cool.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you for your time. I know it's after hours over there. That's why it's so quiet there. You should have seen the last interview we did was with Rap Brewing, Greg Rapp. He's in Seminole, Florida, like not too far from Bradenton.
Yeah.
Um, and the brewery was open, and we set up the cameras, and he's like, near the tasting room, and there's just people screaming. It was awesome. So he got, is it too loud? Is it too loud? So he moves into his brew house, and we could still hear people scream. It was an interesting interview. Those guys are doing some really cool stuff over there too, actually.
Nice. I'll check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you so much for being part of the website. I meant everything I said. I'm not. People who know me well know that I don't really mince words. And say keep pushing the boundaries, man, because it's breweries like yours that are going to push craft beer into the mainstream and keep it in the mainstream for time to come. And I think I think the best thing about craft beer is that it's an approachable product, not only taste-wise, but again, like we were talking about the pocketbook. You don't ever want to get to the point where you're turning people off because of dollar signs, and so you're creating a really expensive tasting product for a reasonable price, and that's a testament again to you guys' abilities. So thank you for everything, for being part of the site. Keep up the good fight over there in Texas, and hopefully when you come down to Miami, we can go grab a beer together.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, I need to check out your scene. I've heard I've had some beer from Funky Buddha, but I need to check out some more of your local scene. So that'd be awesome.
Cool. Well, everybody, thanks for watching. This is Jeff Stuffings again. If you haven't had Jester King and you can get your hands on it, we can get a very limited production down here in South Florida, limited amounts in South Florida. But definitely do yourself a favor and try and trade for some because it's worth it. And thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Thanks, Marco. Cheers, man.
Cheers.